Hi, everybody. Welcome to the EFC webinar on how to be a more politically engaged, active citizen. Probably if you're already watching this webinar, you are well on your way to becoming just that, but we're hoping today will move us a little further along on that journey. We have some great experts to help us. Our guests today are Glendyne Gerrard from Defend Dignity, Karri Munn-Venn from Citizens for Public Justice, and Julia Beazley from the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And I'm Karen Stiller. Welcome. We want you to send in your questions and comments to add to the webinar today, and we will try to address as many of them as we can. Let's begin with each of our guests introducing themselves, their organization, and how their work overlaps with this idea of encouraging Canadians to be involved in the work of change. So Glendyne, let's start with you.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks, Karen. I direct Defend Dignity, which is an initiative of the Christian and Missionary Alliance family of churches. And we exist to end all forms of sexual exploitation in Canada. And one of the ways that we do that is through advocating for law and policy reform with every level of government, federal, provincial, municipal. And we also advocate for change among Canadian companies.
Excellent. Karri, do you want to go next and tell us about your work at CPJ?
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here. So Citizens for Public Justice is a national organization of members inspired by faith to act for justice in Canadian public policy. Together, we strive to respond to God's call to love, to promote justice, and to ensure the flourishing of all creation. We do that through a combination of research and analysis, public engagement, which includes workshops, articles, presentations, and rallies, and also political engagements, writing briefs, meeting with MPs and cabinet ministers and other government officials. And my role at CPJ is a senior policy analyst, and I'm responsible for our climate justice work.
Excellent. You are a busy woman these days, I'm sure.
Yes, I am.
Julia, you are muted, just so you know.
Me. Thank you.
There you are.
I'm having mouse challenges. So I work as Director of Public Policy here at the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. I'm based in our Ottawa office, which we sometimes call the Centre for Faith and Public Life. And in our office here, we engage with the government and in the courts on issues that are of concern to the evangelical community. We seek to bring biblical principles to bear in public policy discussions and in court proceedings, and also to help relate these perspectives on issues to all areas of life, in our families, in our church communities, working out our faith both personally and communally. We seek to inform, encourage, and equip evangelicals in Canada to be engaged on a range of issues. And the issues we address are ones that are of national importance, and we typically will engage primarily at the federal level.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to begin, we're talking to probably an audience of people of faith, and faith undergirds, I think, all of the organizations that you work with. So let's start there, and maybe Glendyne, maybe you could tackle this first. In terms of encouraging Christians specifically to be more involved in activism style work, what is the biblical imperative for doing that? Are we on good ground here?
Yeah, I sure think so. I think, first of all, God invites us to pray that his kingdom will come here on earth. And I think being involved in bringing his kingdom to bear on all of the issues that concern us here on earth is really important. He invites us to bring shalom. He invites us through that shalom to make sense out of some of the relational issues that have happened to us since the fall. And so yeah, just to bring his sense of justice, what he calls us to do here on earth.
How about you, Karri? CPJ is also a faith-based organization, of course. How does faith shape your work and your view of people being more engaged?
Well, I think, as has already been said, I think that the call to engagement and to be active members of society is something we see throughout Scripture. And the passage that I go to most often in terms of what synthesizes it best is probably Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to love justice, seek kindness, and walk humbly with your God? And I think that's kind of, there's so much more to it, but that very briefly kind of synthesizes where we come from. And it's a perspective that our faith is something that needs to be lived in public and through engaging in the society that we're a part of.
Thank you. Julia, do you come across any kind of common hesitations in people of faith to be involved? Like, are people afraid? Are people hesitant? Or do you think Christians kind of get this?
I think it depends a little bit. I think there's a few reasons why people might hesitate to get involved. I think sometimes it can be as simple as, they're not sure what to say. They may be worried that they don't know enough about the issue, or they won't know what to say to the official or decision maker they're speaking with. There's this fear of not being an expert, I think. Like, you have to be an expert in order to speak up. And I think just simply the thought of calling or meeting with an MP, or even writing to an MP or, an elected official, can be really kind of intimidating. And I think in some cases, there may also be this belief that their voice or their actions won't make a difference or can't bring about change. I wouldn't call that fear necessarily. It's sort of, discouragement, or maybe a feeling of helplessness. And I think increasingly, this is important to note, I think some might be afraid to express their views or ask for change because our society seems to be a little less tolerant of, or making less room for beliefs that don't maybe conform to the mainstream on some issues. There may be a fear, if I speak up, will I be targeted? Will I be stereotyped or disadvantaged in some way, depending on the issue you might want to speak to? So I think there's a bunch of reasons why people hesitate, and hopefully we can help them overcome all of those today.
Yeah, well, let's tackle that idea of what difference can it make? Can it possibly make? Because I think I've definitely felt that before. Like, what good does it do if I send an email? So, Karri, I know at Citizens for Public Justice, I think you often are encouraging, individual citizens to take action. So, can you address that feeling of why bother?
Sure. I mean, there's so many great examples of where engagement really has made a difference. And as I said right off the top, my work focuses largely on climate justice. And so the power of individual action this week, of course, is really being exemplified by the young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, who a little over a year ago, by herself, without anybody else, even without complete support from her parents, sat outside the Swedish parliament and said, why should I go to school to study for a future that the adults of the world are not working to protect? And I meant to double check the numbers before this call, but we've had so many people around the world who have come out to stand with her and to say to all governments, yes, we need action on this issue. And that's something, I mean, as far as movement building goes, it's been quite incredible. And of course, that's not the impact that we all have every time we stand up and take action. But I think it is really a beautiful illustration of the way that one person can create change. And the thing is, when one person does it, we all are emboldened, I think, to step up and to participate. And
that's what I really see in the Greta example, is that just the value of the inspiration that one person can bring. So, Glendyne, have you seen that with your work in Defend Dignity? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, fairly recently, I was sitting with a city councillor in the city of Toronto because they are re-examining the bylaws around body rub parlors. And so was in there with a survivor colleague and had a wonderful conversation. And at the end, he could not be more thankful, more grateful that we took the time to see him, because he committee making some of the final recommendations to the city. And he said, I knew absolutely nothing about this. This little subcommittee deals with every form of licensing in the city of Toronto. And the whole body rub parlor issue was just not within his area of expertise. And so I really sensed that our sitting down with him, explaining the issues, explaining our concerns about what the city was recommending to that point, was huge. I mean, he's one of 5. And if we were able to influence his thinking on that issue, then that was worth a lot.
Yeah. Glendyne just touched on something that's really great that we like to kind of encourage people in, and that is that most elected officials have to be generalists. They have to sort of know a little bit about everything. So back to that fear of not being an expert and not knowing everything you could possibly know about an issue. Odds are, unless it's an official who has a really strong passion in a particular issue, it's their portfolio, you know, they're really invested in it, you're going to be on sort of equal footing in terms of your conversation and what you're able to engage on. So that's a really great example of that kind of thing. And sometimes we do go in as the experts, right? So just don't always be afraid of not knowing enough about an issue to engage.
Yeah.
And I think another, if I could jump in too, Karen,
Please.
I think another part of that is really about sharing what matters to us. I mean, it's one thing to go in and have all the figures and the statistics and all of that. But I think what really moves people, and at the end of the day, our elected officials, they're senior public servants, they're people too. And it's the stories that we tell and the way that we can express why does this matter to me? And why is this an important issue? And I think that anybody can do that. Mm-hmm. You know, if we just talk about this is a concern to me, either because of how it affects me directly, or of what I would hope for our society more broadly, that is a really great way to engage, and also to ask them what matters to them. I think too often, and I know I do this, it's an easy shortcut to make assumptions about what especially elected officials think based on their party stripes. But I think it's important for us to sort of step back and say, okay, well, help me understand where you're coming from, because that will enable us to engage them better. And that's something anybody can do.
Yeah, that's really
good. On this same issue. So conversely, we went to another city councillor who did know quite a bit about this particular issue of body reporter licensing. And he shared that he had called a meeting in his ward about this very thing to try to see, what was the community thinking about some of this. And he told us that not one single constituent in his ward came to that meeting. And so his words to us were, does my constituency actually care about this issue? He said, we threw out a meeting about garbage pickup and we had a room full of people. Yeah. And that deeply saddened me that there weren't enough people that found this issue to be compelling enough that they would take the time to go and let their views be known and listen to what he was thinking about the issue. I think it really just behooves us to be smart about what we think is important to us and to be part of it. Otherwise, we're going to have things happen that we're not happy about when we haven't voiced our opinion to really enter into the discussion.
And what I'm really hearing here is that MPs or whomever we're contacting who may be in power over a certain issue, it sounds like they actually might want to hear from us. And that's got to be pretty encouraging.
Yeah. Can I share a story there?
Please.
We have a relatively new executive director. Willard Metzger has come to Citizens for Public Justice from the Mennonite Church of Canada. And he tells a story of when he was head of Mennonite Church Canada and trying to move his board along on an issue. I can't remember the specifics of the issue, but he'd gone as far as he felt like he could. And there were a bunch of young people in his church that were saying, we want more. So he actually encouraged them to organize a rally outside of his office to make a bit of a to-do about calling for him to go further on an issue. And he said it was really essential to him. And it's interesting because that actually allows me to make one other point, is that we often think of engagement and advocacy with relation to elected officials, but it can happen anywhere. And I think part of what we do at CPJ is to encourage people who are members of churches and parishes and congregations to actually have the conversation there, so that if their leaders of faith communities, so if their national leaders or regional leaders are engaged in an issue, that also strengthens the collective voice. So it doesn't have to be your first foray into engagement doesn't have to be to, you know, try to get a meeting with the Prime Minister, but rather have a conversation with your deacon or elder or whatever those people are in the structures where you belong.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about the nature of those meetings briefly. Like I called my MP once a couple of years ago, and to my shame, I can't actually remember the issue, to be honest, at this very second. But what I love the idea that you said, Karri, I think about asking questions, like just being a good conversationalist in a way, which actually I don't think I did. But he was very friendly, and I felt like, yeah, that wasn't so hard, even though I felt kind of embarrassed and silly for some reason, but it went just fine. So as we engage with, let's take elected officials as an example, because I think that's what we often think of first. How should we engage? So listen and ask questions. I like that tip. What are some of your other tips for just a healthy way of communicating? Anybody can jump in on that.
I think first and foremost, as believers, it's good to remember that we're called to do things differently. So this doesn't mean at all that we stay silent or we shrink back from difficult or tough issues. We are called to speak the truth, to stand for justice, but to do it with love, with grace, patience, gentleness, and self-control. And sometimes that's difficult, right? But in our activism, I think it's really important that we're always respectful of those who have different views from our own. It's also important, as we have all said, to be well informed. You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to be well informed about the issues you're talking about. And this is especially important, I think, in this sort of era of internet and social media that we're living in, where there is a lot of misinformation out there. And sometimes it can be really hard to sort out what's accurate and what's not. But it's worth doing the homework to make sure we're well informed and not just being reactionary, or especially that we're not reacting to something that's not accurate. And particularly if you're meeting with an elected official, if it's your MP, it's part of their job to hear from you, to meet with you. So they should be willing to engage with you on issues. But it's when we go and talk to them, it's good to have, you know, sort of have your talking points. What are your concerns? As Karri said, why are you concerned about this? Why does this matter so much to you? I love the idea of kind of asking them sort of how they feel about an issue. But the one thing they will consistently say is, what's your ask? So what do you want them to do? So it's good to always have that in your mind. So this is the issue, this is my concern, this is why I'm concerned about it, and this is what I would like you as my elected official or as a business owner or whatever to do about it. It's important to kind of have that laid out before you go. And we've also found it can be really beneficial to work with other organizations to bring differing voices together towards common goal, common purpose. And I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, in terms of discouragement, it's helpful to remember that sometimes change takes time. You know, sometimes there are quick successes and there are, you know, things that change quickly, but more often if we're looking at something like climate or eliminating or reducing poverty or homelessness or sexual exploitation, these are longer term complex goals that will take time. And sometimes that change is going to be a lot slower and a lot more incremental than we might like, but to just keep at it.
I think for me, the every time I've gone to see any whatever level of government elected official I'm seeing, I do a bit of homework before and check online to find out who is this individual, how long have they been in that role, what are some interesting facts about that person, and it often is at that point, just searching online, that I'll find some commonality between us that is going to be beneficial, even if it's just the initial small talk that we do, something to sort of set the playing field a little bit more levelly or make it level. One cool little story, just last summer, I think it was, I had made an appointment to see a provincial minister. He was the Minister of Finance at the time. Quickly before I hopped on the plane, I looked him up, and lo and behold, his portfolio had just changed in a cabinet shuffle. 2 days before, if I had not checked that, I would not have known. And he was now actually the minister that I really wanted to see, which was the health minister. And so knowing that, walking in the door, knowing that I was going to have the privilege to sit down with this newly appointed health minister on an issue, to put it on his plate right as he started that area of service, was great. And so I just really encourage you to take a few minutes, find out who you're going in to see, just do a little Google search, and that's going to be helpful to you.
I really support what both Julie and Glendyne have said. I think that the finding things that you have in common is really key, because at the end of the day, all of this is based on relationship and connection, right? Whether it's how we change the discourse within our churches or or influence public policy, it's all built on relationships. And I think, to go back to something that Julia said as well, yes, dialogue, respect, be really clear about what you want. And then there's the lovely combination of persistence and patience. You're not going to get it. Yeah. It's very unlikely that you're going to get the outcome that you want just with one meeting or one phone call or one letter. But it's a long arc. And so people need to stick at it, to be persistent, to show up. So that, I mean, there are some MPs who they know who I am, they know what matters to me, and I almost just need to show up and say hello. And they're like, right, those are the things that I need to move forward on. But having that patience is also really important. And it's not always easy, but it's really important.
Yeah. Interesting. So going in angry and defensive is not a good strategy. Theologically, somebody has asked a question or brought up the point, which we touched on this briefly at the beginning, but wondering about maybe evangelical Christian in particular, do we need to do more work to remind our own constituents that we are called to be engaged in the world, that we may need to overcome the view that faith is a private matter of piety and doesn't relate to politics, economics, earth care, etc. And I would add another dimension to that, in that sometimes in politics in Canada, we also are given that message, I think, that, religion is meant to be private and don't bring that up, and so on and so forth. So I wonder, if you could each maybe just briefly respond to that. Again, that idea of how do we encourage faithful people to live that out in a more active way. Julia, do you want to start with that? Because we talk about that a lot.
Sure. I think, it's important to realize that politics and public policy have a profound influence on our society. Public policy influences everything. It influences the way we interact with one another, how we organize our schools, our businesses, our churches, our voluntary associations, how we deal with issues of social concern and justice, how we treat and care for our neighbors who experience poverty, homelessness, exploitation, marginalization, those who are vulnerable among us in a whole bunch of different ways. So it matters to just about every facet of our lives. And without strong Christian involvement in these conversations and in these processes, our witness and the principles that guide us in our engagement, like the importance of caring for those who are vulnerable, or the dignity and value of every human life, or the importance of religious freedom and so on. These things may be missing from the public square. So it's important that we're there, that our voices are there. Our witness is one of compassion and mercy, concern for the well-being of all members of our society, particularly the vulnerable and the powerless. So I think that having our witness there and our voice there is important. It really matters.
Karri, do we need to do a better job reminding the church that? Or it strikes me that CPJ seems to have a strong church involvement.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a strong church involvement. We're made up of individuals rather than congregations or national churches, though we are currently actually looking at how we better integrate some of the partnerships we have. Though it's also interesting to note that part of a space that we occupy right now is that a lot of the national mainline churches, their social justice offices have been decreasing as a result. Often it's a budgetary consideration and that kind of thing, but it seems to be an area that is on the decline, which creates actually a bit more space for us and an opportunity to reach into different spaces. But I think it's really fascinating to think about faith as a private versus sort of a public issue. I mean, because when you go through Scripture, you know, we're asked to tend and take care of the earth, to love and care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Like, it's just, I mean, it's
very active.
And I'm in it, and I've certainly got a bias around that. But I think it's when we look at what we understand as God's vision for the world that we live in, it's not for us to be passive and just sort of let things be. We're called to be active and engaged. And I think it is important for church bodies at all various levels to support that. And I do think that in recent years, I've seen a higher level of engagement. And I mean, certainly more awareness around the breadth of issues that we're encouraged to be engaged in as people of faith in Canada.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's drill down into some nitty-gritty stuff now and talk about what works and what doesn't. Like, I remember at some point being told that signing a petition maybe wasn't such a big deal, but I felt great every time I signed one. So can we get into some specifics? Glendyne, do you want to go first? And like, what should we be doing that is effective?
Well, I think signing a petition is okay, but I would sort of put that at the bottom rung of effectiveness. So if you've got the time, then for sure, a one-on-one visit in the office of an elected official is going to have way more impact. And I love it because it's a two-way conversation, right? You sign a petition, that's just you putting your point across. But if you're sitting in front of an MP or an MPP or whoever it is that you're with, it's two-way conversation. I'm going to be able to read his or her body language. I'll be able to interact with staff, and often the staff member is pretty influential. Maybe not in the room in front of you, but it's been on more than one occasion where it's been the staff person that I've discovered later has really helped to influence the elected person. So phone call is another two-way communication, but then you don't see body language. The staff person is probably not on the call. So I think I would say the visit is always wins, hands down. Letters, for sure you can do letters. And if you do a letter, I think the most effective is to have something in your own words. However, saying that, we do lots of pre-written letters at our events because it's easy, it's quick, it's something that the person can quickly sign and get in the mail. So they all have their place. But I think highest impact, if that's what you're in it for, then by all means try to make the one-on-one visit.
I just want to echo what Glendyne says, and particularly because primarily in our sphere, we're dealing with elected officials, right? So it's that face-to-face contact. It's that I am putting this much effort in, which shows you that I really care about this issue, whether that's, coming in person, making a phone call, or writing a personalized letter. We provide sample letters all the time, but the encouragement is always, you know what, plagiarize at will, make it your own, add your own passion and your own sense to it. But Glendyne, I'm not supposed to ask the questions, but in terms of influencing businesses, Defend Dignity has had some pretty amazing successes with these sort of bigger campaigns. And I think Dignity for All has as well, or CPJ has as well. So Glendyne, if you could just, one of the restaurants, pick a restaurant that has responded to your campaigns.
So we've got a campaign going called Choose, the website is choosechangecanada.org, and the campaign is just Choose Change. And so we're asking a variety of sectors, but I'll pick on one of the restaurants. We've asked a national restaurant chain to filter their public Wi-Fi, because the campaign is all around safety and protection, particularly of children in public spaces from internet pornography. And so I was actually through social media. We were tweeting about it, the campaign, directly to Boston Pizza restaurant chain. It was their marketing person within 2 weeks of putting that campaign live that saw the tweet. My phone rang one day in the office. I looked at the call display. It was Boston Pizza, and I'm thinking, "Oh my goodness, this can't be happening already." And it was. And I think one of the reasons that she really paid attention to it was that she's a young mom with kids herself, and it was a personal concern. But that little social media tweet, which had been accompanied by a lot of pre-written emails that people can access and send through our website, really made the difference. And so she told me by the end of May last year that every single Boston Pizza restaurant in Canada would have filtering in place. She called me the day that it was done and said, "Just wanted to let you know, every restaurant's got that filtering in place." And that felt pretty easy that time around to make those kind of changes.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. Karri, does that resonate with your experience, and what works from the CPJ perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what Glendyne and Julia have said is true in terms of the one-to-one personal engagement really can be effective. But the Boston Pizza story also points to the importance of volume of engagement. And the reality is, if we say to people, "We'd really like you to meet with your MP, but if you can't do that, please sign the petition," we're going to get more signatures on the petition than we are face-to-face meetings. And so that can serve to sort of boost other things that are being done. So when we engage, so I'll use our Give It Up for the Earth campaign as an example. So this is a campaign that we run every year through the season of Lent. And people are asked to make a pledge for something that they're going to do themselves to reduce personal greenhouse gas emissions. And then it includes a postcard that it's changed a couple of times, but either goes to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, or the Prime Minister saying we want Canada to also take action to reduce GHG emissions. So it links the personal and the political, which I think is important. But it also then is, it's a sign-on campaign. People sign the postcard, it goes in. But then we also engage with the minister. She now knows that it's coming, because we're going into our 4th year with this campaign. So she now knows that it's coming and knows to anticipate. This year she actually participated in the personal side of it, which was interesting. But then we also follow up and have a conversation to say, this is what we were hearing from people who are participating. This is what people are concerned about. This is the kind of things we want to see action on. So it's a strategy that folds in a bunch of different things together. And when we meet with other MPs, we keep track of where are we getting engagement. And then we've got 150 communities across the country who participate. So it's like, okay, these are the people or the churches in your constituency that are taking part. So, it's not just us as the folks in the national office, but there are people across the country. And so I think, and the other piece of that's been really interesting is that faith engagement on climate is still new enough that we're considered unlikely suspects. And there's power in that. So that I think, a similar campaign organized by an environmental NGO would get a different kind of acknowledgement than something that comes from us. They may get larger numbers, but there's almost a curiosity factor when it comes from Christians and other people of faith.
Everyone has mentioned social media to a certain extent, and in some ways it's almost, I guess, a given that we would be using social media, but I wonder if you could speak to, maybe is there a more effective platform? Like, I would assume Twitter, is better than Instagram, but how do you all relate to that with your work? Glendyne, you seem to have got Twitter figured out.
I don't know about figuring it out. We've actually, in the last year, really upped our presence on Instagram because of the research around millennials using it and really want to engage younger population. And I'm grateful that has worked for us. We just put together a video. You can tell that we're doing lots of work on body rub parlors and licensing of those places across Canada. So we did a video sort of exposing 7 myths around body rub parlors. So on Instagram, we're releasing 1 myth per week, but with a link to the full video. And we hadn't even sent that video out to our constituents, and the thing just caught fire. I think it probably caught fire mostly on Facebook, but it's been viewed, last time I looked, well over 4,000 times in the last 10 days. So it's been really effective, especially when you can link it then to letters or another piece of advocacy that people can do through the website. And that's all served us really well.
So it strikes me, because we're kind of somewhat talking at different levels here, but we're mostly thinking about individuals, I think, with this webinar. And so for me as an Instagram user, then I can share or, you know, like or whatever, what is already being done really well by the organizations I support. That seems to me pretty obvious, but a good step an individual could take. Karri, how about at CPJ? I'm sure you're social media experts.
Yeah, I mean, we also in the last year or so have really upped our Instagram game. And it's interesting because it's not so much for the direct engagement with elected officials or decision makers, but it is around changing the public discourse, raising awareness about issues. I mean, right now, we're actually in the middle of a national tour. We've been to 7 cities, sort of Vancouver, actually right through last night, closed, we're in St. John's, Newfoundland. So we've covered most of the country. We're making our way back to the middle now. But Instagram has been a huge piece of our outreach and our engagement. And it means what we've seen that I find particularly exciting is more diversity, age, ethnicity, in particular, among the people who are coming out to our events, because we're meeting them where they are, rather than kind of sticking the same old, same old. I mean, our social media game as an organization has evolved leaps and bounds. I mean, I guess it was all pretty new 10 years ago, but it really has evolved. And what's been interesting to see is who else is showing up to the events that we're hosting, and who else is engaging and asking questions.
Yeah. That's really interesting. As we kind of wind down, another participant has asked a really good question that might be a nice way to fade away here. And just this idea of Christians seeming to be known more for what we're against often than what we're for. And, you know, I don't know, wagging our fingers at people instead of being kind. It might be a reputation problem we have. And so the question is, how can we, or should we be reframing this, particularly when speaking to our elected officials? So I thought right away about our tone. Like at the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, we think about not just what we're saying it, but how we're saying it. And I think partly because we know that can be an obstacle to people. They may think they have us all figured out, and then not listen well because of that. So I wondered if we could each of you could take that on, and maybe Julia, you want to start with that?
Yeah, you know, we've all talked about how important it is to make sure that our tone is respectful. And, you know, the reality is sometimes we are critiquing a policy or a law, but to still do it in a way that is respectful. We try always to be constructive. So if we do have to come out against something, which, you know, we often do, to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's constructive. We're not just coming out and saying we don't like this, but here are some ways that this policy or this legislation could be fixed. You know, tweak this to make sure that these things are addressed and taken care of and protected and so on. So we always try to be very, very constructive in the ways that we engage. And that's not just about having an ask, it's about being somebody that someone wants to talk to, right? You know, if you're just coming and you're critiquing and you're being negative and you're not bringing anything in terms of solutions or alternatives, the conversation doesn't really have a lot of place to go. But if we can really try to be as constructive as possible in our engagement, that's helpful. And, you know, certainly some of it is in the framing, right? I think tackling issues like poverty and homelessness, or climate, or ending sexual exploitation, or protecting vulnerable Canadians, or promoting palliative care, good palliative care for all Canadians. These are positive messages. These are not against things. They are calling for justice, protection, for different parts of our society. And I think that's important. Now, those, I think how we may be portrayed, those don't always get the attention. Quite often there is a more negative portrayal of faith group engagement, but we're certainly doing it. Every one of the examples you have here today, there's so much positive engagement and calling for justice for others, or for, so I think there's a lot of good there. And maybe we just need to figure out how to do a better job of amplifying those voices sometimes.
Yeah, how we tell our stories. Karri?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of that too is celebrating successes. And admittedly, that's another one that's not, it can be really easy to kind of go, okay, well, that's good, which is part of what we do. But, within the last several years, there's a new national anti-poverty strategy, there's a new climate change plan, and the federal government declared a climate emergency. So these are things that are valuable steps, and we try really hard to, when those moments happen, to say, this is a move in the right direction. This is why this is good. We will generally also follow it up with, and these are the ways that we can continue to make this better. But the this is good is the point I'm trying to emphasize here, because it is something that, and I think that's important for the people that are engaged with us, our members, our supporters. Because when we get to a point where there is forward motion on an issue that we're really concerned about, it's really valuable, I think, for our supporters to know that they've helped achieve something positive. And if we only keep focused on what we don't like, then it doesn't work as well. And in all of our recommendations, we try to lead with, this is where we want to go. We want ambition. We want something positive. We want something that looks after everyone. And then we get into, and these are the ways that we think that can happen. Knowing full well that when change comes, it doesn't always look exactly the way we might anticipate, but we hope to help to influence things in a positive way.
Very good. All right, as we end, I would like to invite you each to tell people where they can find you online, and also just your best tip, which you may have already shared already about engagement, but the one takeaway you would like people to have. And we do have a poll up right now for our viewers. So if people are participating, if you could fill that out and let us know your answer to those questions about whether you've contacted your MP before, if you've ever written a letter to the editor, and if you've used social media, we would love to hear from you on that. So Glendyne, do you want to lead us as we walk out the door here with your best tip and where people can find you?
Well, you can find me at DefendDignity.ca. You can contact me that way through the website, or Facebook, Instagram, if you're on any of those, Twitter. We're on all of those platforms. The piece of advice I'm going to leave you with is something that I'm hoping to do myself as something a bit new for me as I think of my own activism related to the upcoming federal election. And that's to prep a few questions so that when a candidate comes to my front door on the issues that I have that are really valuable to me, I want to have just a couple questions ready so that when they do come knocking, I'll be able to ask them, okay, where do you stand on this issue? That's going to inform my own vote. And so I would just encourage people to choose one issue that they're passionate about. Think of a couple questions that you can use when somebody comes to the door. Maybe even better yet, find out when the candidate debate is happening in your area, and then have those questions ready to ask when you're there.
Great tip. Thank you. Julia?
I love that. I've been itching for someone to come to my door so I can ask my questions.
Oh, no.
But more generally, I think it was Karri who said this: find your passion. What are you passionate about? What is the issue that really resonates with you, that you really want to see some change brought about in that area? And then, you know, find a reputable source of information, become informed on this, and then just jump in. You know, you are expressing your concern and your passion, and just go for it, I guess. Don't hesitate.
Good. Thank you.
All right.
Karri?
Really quickly, you can find us at cpj.ca, but not tomorrow because we're participating in the digital climate strike.
Okay, excellent.
On social media, we're at Public Justice on Instagram and Twitter, and Citizens for Public Justice on Facebook. My advice, I really agree with everything that's been said so far, but I would add, be kind and stick to the issues. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't make assumptions about what they think based on their political affiliation, if you know what it is. And don't give up. This is something that's it's the kind of work that requires persistent, patient, faithful engagement. And if we all keep working, we can create a better world.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I'm feeling inspired and equipped, and I hope other people are too. You can watch this webinar again or share it with others. Find us at the efc.ca, and there's a whole bunch of other resources there too. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.